You're listening to the Autism Weekly podcast. Each week, we share community voices and bring light to stories that increase awareness, acceptance, equity, access, and inclusion. If you haven't already, subscribe to join the Autism Weekly family. I'm your host, Jeff Skibitsky. This week, we're joined by Ashley Penney and Yev Veverka, authors of Compassion, the Eighth Dimension of Applied Behavior Analysis. With expertise in research, education, and clinical practice, they are leading voices in reshaping ABA and championing compassionate care. While their co-authors, Adriana Luna, Catherine Bateman, and Eileen Schwartz, couldn't join us today, we're excited to dive into the group's groundbreaking work and their vision for the future of applied behavior analysis. Welcome to the podcast, Ashley and Yev.
Thanks for having us. We're so excited to be here.
Yes, thank you.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And this is a topic I love to talk about. I think that this has been more of a concept for the last 15, 20 years that, everybody would say, well, I love the idea of compassion. It's good to be understanding. It's good to take others' perspectives. It's good to show empathy. But what we haven't always done is tried to figure out how that actually looks in a service model of care and what that looks like as far as bringing people into the decision-making process. So I'd love to be able to get into all that, but before we get started, this is the 1-year anniversary for you all. You all put this journal article out about a year ago. I guess I'd love to know how you're defining, and maybe we can start with you, Yev, how you're defining compassionate care when it comes to ABA, because it still is a hot topic. This is debated as far as what ABA should look like.
Sure, yeah. So it's wild to think that it's already been a year since we published that, and then probably 3 years since we first conceptualized it. I don't think our definition necessarily has changed from the paper. So in our paper, we talked about some guiding principles that we built on the work of our colleagues. I'm going to try to list them all: beneficence, inclusion, professional excellence, self-determination, and social justice. And so I think for us, using those to guide our definition of compassionate care, compassion in ABA means an active process of promoting our clients' quality of life and well-being above all else, and asking truly, like, whose lives are we here, or whose lives are being improved by our treatments, our outcomes, our goals, and how are we creating true, meaningful participation opportunities and inclusion. Ashley, if you have anything to add there.
I think the only thing I would add to that too, in terms of like moving from a concept to practice, is we included the 5 guiding principles as a way for practitioners to engage in active reflection about the work that they're doing. It does require more work. It's really easy to make assumptions about the work that we're doing and assume that it is leading to improved quality of life, and assume that the way that we're addressing goals or progress are acceptable to our patients and our clients. But by using those 5 guiding principles and really thinking through some of the implications for practice that we include in the paper, it takes more effort on the part of the practitioner, but it really does help center the client in that decision-making process, so that we can no longer just safely assume that we are doing good work and we are doing things in the best interest of our clients without actively engaging them in that process.
And I mean, from the clinical standpoint, that seems like it would always be the best care model. But historically, I would suggest that that's not always how it's been. It's even outside of ABA in medicine, it's the clinician knows, the clinician tells you, the clinician is the one that is going to let you know what you should prioritize. What is the most important thing to you is being told to you by somebody else. How has that started to change? I mean, is that just a heavy emphasis on client-centered programming? It's over the course of this year, more and more people are becoming aware. They're reading your article. How are they starting to change their practice right now to make sure that they're not just doing lip service to compassionate care, but they're actually applying it?
That's such a good question. I think I'll start with that one, Yevon, if you want to follow up. I mean, I think that you brought up the medical model and kind of the traditional perspective of like your doctor knows best, your provider knows best. And I think that that is a stark contrast when applied behavior analysis became kind of a medicalized practice, because we can't really, we can know what's maybe recommended in terms of the scientifically sound way to change behavior, but what behaviors we change, where they're going to happen, all of that stuff, we have to rely on our clients and their families and their communities and the people and places where they want to spend their time to know that what we're doing actually fits with their life and their context. It's not the same thing as saying, oh, you have this situation, take this medication. It's a really different ball game altogether.
And yeah, if I were to break this down into just component pieces of how maybe a board certified behavior analyst might tackle their work, and I'm looking at the programming piece. When I'm talking about programming, are we talking about everything from goal selection to the language that we're utilizing in our program is being more affirming towards the individual who's receiving care, to what techniques and how much transparency we have with our client as far as this is exactly what you should expect. This is exactly how we're going to go about it. You have a voice to be able to withdraw at any time. How does all of this work with compassionate care when we're creating goals from the beginning? Because as a BCBA, that's probably one of the most important things, is that I set things up right.
Sure. Yeah. So to answer your first question, yes, it's all of the things, the goals, the outcomes, the procedures we're using. And it's really kind of taking this idea of shifting from being that expert, like you talked about, the medical expert, to partner. So thinking about something, I think we talk about this in our paper, of ABA as not something that is done to clients. ABA started off as a science. It started off as a compassionate science, and then all these kind of systemic barriers got in our way as a field. But thinking of ABA as a science again, and something that is applied in partnership with our clients to incorporate their values, their context. We'll run a program very differently with a child who is getting services in their religious school versus an outdoor preschool. I guess that might be a very Seattle example. But it's incorporating them as partners, so we can ask questions like, what is your family value? Does our science and the application of our science fit in with your life, rather than disrupt it, rather than we're going to pull you out and put you in this clinical setting and apply this set of programs that we always do in the same order, no matter who you are or what you value. Did I answer your question, Jeff?
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, but you mentioned one thing in that answer that I'd love to explore a little bit, and maybe Ashley, you can weigh in on this, but barriers. I mean, are these barriers that are external barriers? Are they ones that in our education process we're not taught enough initially on how to be more creative in our approach? Is it because we don't have ongoing training? Are there insurance or payer barriers? Like, what are these barriers that have influenced the way that we're doing practice that maybe have inhibited our ability to stick with a compassionate care model historically?
Yes. No, I'm just kidding. There are barriers all across the place. And I think that some of them too are barriers that we have now that were actually things that facilitated access to services at one point in time. So if we really think back to, the original conception of applied behavior analysis, those were applied goals based on the settings and environments where people were spending their time with this intention of increasing access to a variety of places. And then we saw applied behavior analysis as something that was available to people who could afford it, and in some cases something that was available to people in schools through special education training. And then with kind of the increase in healthcare funding, that was a really important opportunity in our field, but it also creates barriers as well, because now we have this medicalized model, and there are barriers in terms of, schools work on educational outcomes. Private providers who are working with health insurance have to work on medically necessary outcomes. But most people want to spend their time and their lives in places outside of kind of thinking about this medicalized model or an education only based model. And so I think the barriers, I think we're at a point in time where we have this opportunity for growth, and growth and change doesn't happen in a linear and easy way. And so all the barriers that you mentioned are there, and we certainly don't have answers for those things. But the more we kind of continue to push back on what a compassionate science of applied behavior analysis looks like, and the more we advocate for outcomes that are meaningful for our clients and really program for those things from the beginning, challenging though it may be, the better off our field will be.
Absolutely. And you use the word meaningful. And when you were talking earlier, Yev, you were talking about client-centered approaches. And it seems to me is that the most meaningful programming is coming from that collaboration with your client to make sure that anything that we're doing has an immediate value to the way that they're seeing their service and the way that they're trying to be able to be empowered through their life. How do you, I guess the juxtaposition of this is that a lot of our BCBAs are trained to do an assessment, create the plan, present the plan, tell them this is what we're doing, and put that into play. What would you be coaching that BCBA who's assessing their child, trying to use all of their academic information to be able to do this perfect plan and perfect techniques? And how would you be coaching them differently to make sure that what they're doing is meaningful to the client?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think my students get sick of hearing me say the words, it depends. It's all about, I always tell them context above all else. So think about context. When an assessment can look the exact same for two kids. And in one, so let's say I work on feeding, for example, and let's say in one family, an assessment shows that this child isn't self-feeding. They're not using utensils, they're not self-feeding. And in another assessment, it shows the same thing. But does that mean we absolutely work on it for both? Not necessarily, right? We have to ask some further questions and do some critical thinking about context. So is this important for this family? Is it a cultural, so in some cultures, their kids are fed later in life, and it is perfectly within normal, I'm using quotes for those who can't see, within normal, like behavior, it's a perfectly normal and anticipated behavior, even in older kids. So I think just kind of thinking about the human and the family as an individual rather than following the series of, we go from assessment, and when we show that this skill is missing, we write a program for it, taking a step in between that and asking questions about, does this individual need this skill? Does this family need them to learn the skill? What will it do for their outcome, for their quality of lives, and how they want to spend their time?
And is part of this, I mean, when you were talking about the building of the skill for an individual and the family being able to help support that skill in their own way, is that a lot of behavioral techniques I couldn't always imagine coming into my house at the end of my day and running ABA programs in the way that behavior analysts might be doing to be able to establish a skill in my home environment. How much of compassionate care is really understanding how the family flow is and modifying what you're doing technique wise and modifying what you're doing for goals to really try and say, I'm trying to be able to create more opportunity for you all as a family to exist the way you want to. I'm trying to empower you to be able to be a part of every environment you want to, versus saying, I need you to do all the drills that I'm doing on a regular basis in your home environment. Is there a lot of flexibility with that sort of approach? And maybe Yev, you can start us off, and Ashley, you can weigh in on this as well.
I mean, there should be, right? I think it's a different question, is there versus should there be? And there should be flexibility if we're truly thinking about an individual's context and what outcomes matter to them. It makes me think of my own experience with trying ABA for my daughter, where she was given a kind of a set of cookie cutter programs, and we had to keep her area of the house clean for therapy. And one of the behaviors we were struggling with was property destruction, and kind of like she would tear apart her room, and then I was scrambling to put it back together so therapy could occur, where that wasn't therapeutic for us. What we needed was kind of embedded um, practice and parenting support, somebody to maybe help us with some visual schedules. So 100%, like I lived that firsthand, where it doesn't, a mismatch between intervention and context is, I would almost argue, maybe, I don't know, that it's no longer really applying our science. Context is part of it.
Absolutely. And Ashley, would you say that, like, I mean, that's one of the key components to buy-in is really connecting it to what's part of that child's world?
I do think so, absolutely. And I think, I want to kind of revisit Yev's example for a minute too, and call out the fact that you were a BCBA at that time and in a ABA doctoral program. And like you mentioned kind of this example of, I can't imagine doing what I do and then coming home and having to run ABA sessions. And I think that's a really important point. Like Yev had the skill set to do that. And at the end of the day, her role was mom. You have to be mom for your child. And so when we think about, I always struggle a little bit with the term buy-in, because to me, that means that that I, as a behavior analyst, am selling you something that you may or may not need or want. And so my preference when I think about working with families is, how do we come into alignment with each other? And one of the things that I think that really requires, which is another barrier or challenge for our field that we have to kind of push through and address, is higher level clinical skill set. And I think that what that might mean for a lot of our newer behavior analysts is mentorship when you're in that role as a BCBA. So you're a new BCBA, you've completed your coursework, you've completed the task list, you passed your test, and you're still brand new to this field. You have kind of that entry level competency. And so having someone to mentor you on the job and making sure that we really build that infrastructure for people so that they can engage in that higher level clinical thinking and problem solving, to be flexible with families and really meet them where they are, is an absolutely necessary kind of bottom line thing that we should be doing across the board.
Absolutely. And I mean, and one of the things that just immediately comes to mind as we're talking through a lot of these issues is that autism in general, we're treating a lot of social understanding, social perspectives, being able to kind of process, the world outside of us in a way that we understand why others might be responding in different ways. We're not always trying to change or move the position of somebody who's autistic and tell them that their perception is wrong, but we're trying to build that understanding of the social environment around them. One of the components that I feel like oftentimes can be improved upon is our own evaluation of what that social environment is. You talk about cookie cutter for programs. Oftentimes is that we default to a cookie cutter social environment that's in this kind of figment of our imagination of this is how social settings should always be. How important for compassionate care is it to do a real cultural evaluation, ecological evaluation, all of those component pieces to make sure that you're matching the needs and the desires and the values of the recipients of care? And maybe Yev, you can kind of weigh in and give us some understanding of where those two things come into play.
I think it comes into play when we do talk about, like, I think it just naturally falls into play when we talk about centering the family and making sure that we are aligning with what they are needing us to do. So we have to be willing to learn from our clients and families and to kind of challenge what our views. I mean, this is something I've worked on as a practitioner. There's things that I thought were gold standard, that were gold standard for a specific subset of people. So like white middle class. Um, and so now we're challenged to just kind of ask ourselves, how does this fit within the specific family's culture? And if we're learning from our families and thinking about ourselves as partners, we can truly learn, how does this fit in? How can we adjust our science for a specific family?
Would I be wrong, Ashley, in suggesting that if I didn't really evaluate the cultural environment and the social environment that that child actually belongs in, is that I could actually be teaching wrong responses or responses that are going to have no value to them or not going to
I
be reciprocated?
I don't think that's wrong at all. I mean, I think that's really one of the most important implications and kind of turning points where we are in our field right now is I think we need to move away from this assumption that anything we might decide to work on is and I'm oversimplifying, but anything we might decide to work on is of value and really assume instead that we have just as much to learn from our clients and their families and their communities, whoever that might be, about how to decide what matters the most to them. I mean, I think that as Yev mentioned, we have a variety of different curriculum-based assessments that we can choose from when it comes time to decide on goals, and they're very much aligned. They're very much aligned with white, upper middle class, highly educated, typical families. So, if we're asking questions like, "Who sits around your dinner table?" I'm making a lot of assumptions that the family sits down together at a dinner table, and I might be missing out on a variety of questions that actually could help me develop a more meaningful outcome or a more meaningful intervention if feeding or meal times is an important area of focus for that family. So my kind of goal would be that we get to a point where we don't have to ask that question anymore. That really everybody is embedding that into the assessment components that they're doing with every family. And we have just as many tools at our disposal to choose from in terms of how we do that.
So you had spoken about your personal behavior change plan that was going into place for you and your child is that the behavior analyst went in and they had very specific goal with a very specific outcome and they wanted to meet that outcome, but it didn't take into consideration what was important for you and your family. When we're talking about some of the social components, is that we have like this social playbook and we're trying to work through it, say, okay, I got this, check that box, but we're not always taking into consideration what's important for that child to be able to really engage and feel successful in their environment socially. Is there a different way we should be looking at outcomes that's a little bit more holistic, that's aligned with compassionate care?
I think it's when possible asking our clients, or if not possible to ask our clients and asking their families. Um, and I would say this for me too. If somebody came in and told me, here's what success looks like for you today, I would be like, who are you to tell me what success looks like for me, right? And I think we do that for um our kids who don't have a diagnosed disability. We let them kind of have that autonomy in deciding what success and what joy and what all these outcomes look like for them. They tell us, like my kid that doesn't have a disability says, "Can you sign me up for Pokemon after school?" And I don't say, "Well, will it lead to these outcomes of like increased social interactions and so on?" I say, "Yeah, it sounds like you really want to do that and that sounds fun. Yes, I will sign you up." And so I think we need to be listening to or observing for when we can't listen to kind of verbal information, observing what outcomes look like for our clients and for our family, and then matching to that rather than kind of deciding. If somebody had asked me, what outcome do you want to see with your daughter, I would have said nothing about her visual perception or matching skills. I would have spoken about our family kind of flow and peace and my parenting and behaviors that felt unsafe to her younger brothers, and we could have found a match there that wouldn't have caused me to kind of criticize our field and leave therapy.
Yeah, and what you're describing there, I think, is in line with, at least for us, is that at ABS Kids, where my organization is, that we've really focused more on trying to understand what those priorities of the family are, but looking at quality of life on a regular basis to make sure that what we're doing is impacting the child and the family in the ways that the family finds valuable. I mean, I think the only way really to do that is to consistently reevaluate the quality of life to make sure that that's improving over time. Because I think that would hit on, am I running into a lot of these medical concerns that I used to have because of behaviors? Am I dealing with additional stressors because I can't even get out into the community because I'm nervous all the time? Is my child, do they have sustained friendships, or are they starting to emerge to be able to kind of engage with some of their peers, meaning we have an outside world outside of our house? Some of these things seem inherent to me of, well, that's what you really want out of care, right? You want to create an outside world. You want somebody to have empowered opportunities. So that's something that we've invested in. Is that along the lines of what you're thinking, as far as, you should have these constant conversations, you should be reprioritizing goals on a regular basis to meet the needs of the child and the family, but then you should have a way to be able to evaluate, am I getting there? It's not completely subjective, but it's giving me some guidance to know, am I meeting those goals? What do you think on that, Ashley?
I love that. And I think that I think you're exactly right. And like the way that your organization's approaching that is fantastic. I think it also requires some, I don't know if flexibility is the right word, but um maybe flexibility and more humility on the part of the practitioners as well. I think sometimes we tend to set up, we have this very rigid way of thinking about progress, and so we set up artificial ways of measuring progress, and we have parents collecting data, and that may be more than we actually, I'm going to just go out and say that is definitely more than we need to be asking them to do. As a parent of children not on the spectrum, I have enough on my plate. If I had to go collect data, like on top of everything else that I have to do at the end of every day, I can tell you right now, I wouldn't do it. And we can also think about our data and the way that we're measuring progress in different ways too. And I think one of those ways is if a parent says to us, hey, we were able to go to the grocery store. That's data right there. Like we can describe that in a way that shows progress. We don't have
Mhm.
to say, okay, can you fill out this checklist on all the different steps and the different levels of support that you offered when you went to the grocery store? They're going to stop going to the grocery store. They're going to stop telling us what they've done when they went to the grocery store, or they're going to avoid it altogether because that's too much. I think the other thing that we can do is use common language too. I think that's a hugely isolating thing that we do in our field. And so two very simple things would be using language that people can understand and making sure that we are able to also think flexibly about how we measure progress and kind of how parents are reporting on those successes to us, and really not asking them to do too much, if we unless we really need to, or really thinking maybe rather than not thinking about it as us asking them to do too much, coming together to solve those problems in a way that works with their family. So again, really thinking about that alignment process. What is something that's doable for you if you need to go to the grocery store? How can I help support you? And how can we break that down? And really coming up with what those steps look like together, as opposed to prescribing it for the family.
Yeah, I appreciate the fact that you spoke about language there. One of the things that I find very important is not only are we normalizing our language that everybody has the ability to be able to kind of understand exactly what's going on. We're not talking down to people. We're all on the same level. But I think that the other component to that is finding ways that we're using language that is affirming rather than debasing. Is like, I want somebody to feel good about the goal. I want somebody to feel good about the techniques we're using. I don't want them feeling as if they're wrong or that they're bad and that I'm fixing them. It's like, let's make sure that we're using language that gives somebody power through that process. I would imagine there's so many practitioners out there. I've seen it as everybody is wanting to get better at this. It's not that you have folks that are saying, I don't want to be compassionate. Everybody wants to. What are the first steps that folks can start taking to not just understand compassionate care, but to know some actionable steps to immerse it into their practice? And yeah, is there something that you'd be recommending right off the bat?
Well, first, I want to step back a second and say that the first thing to do is to recognize that compassionate care isn't a different practice. It's not this packaged up, because I think then we get into, I think you mentioned it as like a buzzword or lip service. I think we get into kind of like checking boxes. Okay, I interviewed the family, check. I checked the context, and we check off the things, and then we're like, I did compassionate care. Compassionate care is defined by the outcomes. And so it's not a set of procedures that you're ever going to just like check off and say, I now practice compassionate care. It's something that we're centering as a identifying part of our science that helps us measure outcomes. So that's kind of a first thing. But then I would say the next step, the second step after you recognize that, is some self reflection and kind of understanding, what do I think is the gold standard? What was I taught? How would this look with a different family? And how will I ask questions of this specific family to make sure that I truly understand their needs? I'll stop there because I could keep going.
Well, I mean, just even taking that self-reflection, but are there is there value in doing external validation to somebody saying, hey, let me take a look at what you're doing. Let me take a look at your programs. Let me talk to your families and give you a better idea and understanding of, are they feeling valued through the process? I think potentially some of that surveying and some of that um, even deep dives from somebody who could be a little bit more critical on, what things look like. It could be a value. Is doing some form of external audit, would that be supportive as well?
Sure. I mean, I think if the families are involved, especially, I think the people that can give us the best information about how about our outcomes are our consumers, right? So we wouldn't, if we're selling something, or if we're in a different business, we're not going to ask a bunch of other people to see if we're doing it right. We're going to ask the consumers.
Hmm.
And so I think measures of social validity, measuring those quality of life indicators from our consumers is probably the most validating thing we can do. But certainly learning from others in our field and others in different disciplines. We've had a lot of feedback from folks adjacent to our disciplines, from speech language pathology, from occupational therapy, and asking kind of outside of our field of ABA would be another thing I would love to see more of.
Absolutely. And I mean, just even through doing some of those accreditation processes, one of the things that I think that you learn the most is, the feedback that you're getting from your consumer. And it shouldn't just be a one-off through accreditation process. This should be part of every organization's regular building process to say, where are we where are we fulfilling exactly what you're hoping to be able to see? Where can we learn and improve? Because as soon as you don't think that you can improve on your delivery to a recipient of care, you're probably failing them. So, I mean, there's always room to get better and to meet them kind of at the table where they're at. Ashley, do you have other insights to this?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that you have hit on too that I want to call out is an increase in collaboration among applied behavior analysts. And I think that as a field, we don't have a great reputation for being good collaborators or being humble practitioners. And so, one of the things that I think is actually very achievable that any BCBA can start doing is engaging in collaboration with other people. And that requires um, a level of humility to say, hey, I have this family that I'm working with. I have this child that I'm working with. I have this goal that I'm working on. I think that I'm kind of applying these 5 guiding principles, and we have these principles in our paper as an exercise to help practitioners think through the application of compassion can you talk through this with me and see if I'm missing something? No one person holds all the answers, and I think that that's an important element here. And so even if you don't have access to the accreditation process just yet, there are things that you can be doing right now by having another person to talk through what you're doing and give you feedback. And I think really the important part there is being open to that feedback. I can't tell you how many people tell me, oh yeah, I love feedback, I'm so open to feedback. And talk about lip service. Like, it is not actually true when the rubber hits the road and feedback is given. So I think just generally speaking, we know that feedback's important in our field. And so knowing how to give that based on people's communication styles, how to receive that, and then what to do with it too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, part of improvement is recognizing and learning from all the failures. Is that what you're describing, I think, is important in almost every walk of life. Just being able to kind of say, it's okay to fail. It's we all are going to fail regularly. Let's learn from that and see how we can improve that next step. So it's been a year since you put out the publication. Awareness around some of these issues alone, I think, creates some change. It gets people talking. It gets people self-evaluating, like you were saying. So, I mean, I guess, Yev, what are your reflections? I mean, what have you seen over this last year since you guys have published? Have you seen some changes in the dialogue? Have you seen some changes in some of the behaviors or some of the coordination of care or collaboration? I mean, what are you watching right now? What are you observing?
It's definitely been heartening to see some changes in dialogue, or at least people reaching out to talk about what does this mean. I'll touch on something Ashley just said. We never proposed that we were experts on what compassion means. We just proposed that we start talking about it. And it's been very validating to see kind of a response around that growing. I think we've seen more discussion, not necessarily related to our article, but in general in the field of honoring autonomy and focusing on quality of life and indices of happiness and assent-based care. We still have a lot of work to do, and I think my hope is that it took something like 50 years before somebody said, hey, these 7 dimensions are old, should we think about them? And so I hope that people start kind of revisiting that every few years and talking about how are we defining our field given the context, given society, given all these things. So I think overall it's been an encouraging response, and it's also really hard to think about how much work we have to do in breaking down some of the barriers to actually doing this work.
Yeah, and hopefully it isn't another 50 years before we start to reevaluate and look at things a little bit deeper again. Ashley, what do you expect in the next year? I mean, we're 1 year out of your publication. You're starting to see some dialogue. You're starting to see a little bit more people aware of the fact that this needs to be embedded in every step of the process. Every thought I have has to be led by compassionate care. What are you hoping for this upcoming year as far as the field of ABA and the evolving nature of compassionate care being a part of every program as far as embedded directly into what we're doing, how we're thinking, how we're approaching?
That's a great question. I would say what I would hope to see is more conversation about, with an understanding that everything related to compassionate care, everything really related to our clients and our field in general, has to be viewed and understood with a sense of nuance. There is no person in this world lives in isolation. We're all in relating, living within systems, school systems, family systems. And so it's complex. So to oversimplify and kind of expect anybody can be treated based on a checklist, I think that's something we need to kind of leave by the wayside. The particular addition, or I can't think of the word, that this was a special topic in behavior analysis in practice, was all about compassion. And the purpose of this special topic was to define compassion and to understand what all these people mean when we talk about compassion within applied behavior analysis. There are some great articles I would suggest looking into those if that's something that people are interested in, reading the other articles in this special topic. Because the purpose of that was to help us move into this next step. What does it mean to have compassion as a dimension of behavior analysis? I think that's one of the questions we keep getting a lot from people is, well, has it been accepted as an 8th dimension? And as far as I know, there's nobody who's going to say like, yes, this is now the dimension. Like this is something that we've proposed. We put in a paper the same way that Bear, Wolf, and Risley put the original 7 dimensions into a paper, and time will tell if it is something that is quote unquote accepted as a dimension. If people start talking at conferences about the 8th dimension or the 8 dimensions of applied behavior analysis, if that's something that's taught in coursework, that's really the only way that we can really begin to see if this is something that's embedded into our field. But all of these other papers in that same special topic can help us think about more ways to actually engage in practice-based implications for what to do when you're out there with your clients.
I definitely appreciate the work that you all have put in and bringing this discussion to the table. For those that have not accessed the article, because there's going to be a lot of people out there who just maybe haven't stumbled across it yet, where can they get information on not only that article, but the other work that you all are doing right now, Yev?
I think I would suggest starting with the special issue that Ashley mentioned. And there's just it's hard. There's so many people doing amazing work, so it's hard to think about who to point people to. But I would start by looking into some of the organizations that are talking specifically about marginalized communities and context within various cultural communities. So Black applied behavior analysts. Ashley, help me out if I can't remember some of the other ones that we have listed. We talk about them in our paper too, but I would just push people to listen to those doing the work in different communities and learn from different ways to apply ABA, not just read our article, but also start talking to folks.
Absolutely. And I think that also changes some of the dialogue right now. The last thing that we ever want to hear is recipients of care come back later and say that they didn't feel valued, or say that the techniques that they were exposed to weren't ones that they feel proud of. And I think that by looking at everything through a lens of compassion will guide us away from that. So Ashley, Yev, thank you so much for continuing this conversation and for putting out this wonderful article, which hopefully will change a lot of perspectives in our field.
Thank you. We had a great time talking to you. I would just add too, if people don't have access to the article, they can also reach out to us via email. We're happy to share it.
Absolutely. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to Autism Weekly. We hope you tune back in next week to learn more about autism in the real world. Autism Weekly is now found on all the major listening apps, including Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Subscribe to be notified when we post a new podcast. Autism Weekly is produced by ABS Kids. ABS Kids is proud to provide diagnostic assessments and ABA therapy to children with developmental delays like autism spectrum disorder. You can learn more about ABS Kids and the Autism Weekly podcast by visiting abskids.com. Thanks for tuning in. See you again next week.